my colleagues to stay in the fight to make sure that we help this president deliver on a promise that he made years ago. You know, I'm sad that tonight we're here and we're on a backdrop of a potential government shutdown, but really what it is more of a function of the fact that we have not done our job like we should have done already. The president, many months ago, said that he would not sign another funding bill unless we gave him wall funding. So what did this House do? It passed a bill to fund the Department of Defense and passed a short-term CR. And they said, you know what, we're going to have that fight, but we're going to have that fight after the midterms. Well, Mr. Speaker, it is after the midterms. And we're here with a number of my colleagues tonight to say that we're ready to fight on behalf of all the freedom-loving Americans to make sure that we have secure borders and that never again do we have to worry about terrorists and drug traffickers coming across our southern borders. So I have a number of my colleagues tonight, Mr. Speaker, that want to speak on this to encourage the American people to stand with us in this fight. And so I'd recognize the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, I'll call you Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful that my colleagues are here standing up for the crisis, to solve the crisis on the border. Securing the United States and the American people, this border is a fundamental constitutional responsibility of the federal government. We have members of the House and Senate who are still unwilling to ensure we have control over our borders, unwilling to ensure we know who enters the United States, and unwilling to enforce our immigration laws. Some of the opposition has forgotten their previous support for border walls back then. Before, they didn't fundamentally disagree with border security or the border wall. But now they simply don't want President Trump or elected Republicans to get a win. What they want is open borders. In 2006, some of the Democrats still in the Senate today, including Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, voted in favor of the Secure Fence Act to build a southern border wall. For now, Republicans still control Congress. Rumor is that our leaders are negotiating a deal to avert a shutdown and fund the government through February 8th. Once again, we're kicking the fight for border security down the road. When are we going to stand up and fight, if not now? Our coalition of members here have drafted an amendment that would allow us to deliver on our promise to make the necessary policy changes to end catch and release, increase the number of immigration judges, and provide $5 billion in border wall funding. In all of the debate about borders and illegal immigration, many of the headlines focus on those who've come here illegally. But I urge you to remember people on the American side of the border. Remember the ranchers and residents living along the border who are impacted by smuggling and trafficking that goes on because of our lack of will in this body. Remember our Border Patrol agents who risk their lives every day trying to keep us secure. I urge my colleagues in the House and our leadership to think about what's best for America. Is it the status quo, or is it standing up to fight for the security and sovereignty of our nation? Clearly, we must stand up and fight now. I urge my fellow members to support funding for the border wall before January 3rd comes, and if we have to, I'm willing to stay here to make sure that happens. I yield back. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman from Arizona. I recognize another gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Gozar.
I thank the gentleman from North Carolina for yielding. Mr. Speaker, a study came out earlier this year that said the opioid epidemic today is deadlier than the Vietnam War in 1968. That study found that opioids had cost our country more than 1.7 million years of life. Those are moments of joy, family, and community that are lost irrevocably. And we move into the Christmas season, it is worth thinking about the millions of American families dealing with addiction and overdose tragedies. We've done a great deal in Congress to try to fight the epidemic, from beefing up grants to tougher law enforcement to fixing the pain medication guidelines to cracking down on bad actors in the pharmaceutical industry. But we've not addressed the immigration issue, which is central to the crisis. The book Dreamland, written by veteran LA Times reporter Sam Quinones, provides one of the most definitive accounts of how we got to this grim place we are today. It details how Mexican nationals south of Arizona pioneered a new model of drug distribution, decentralized and customer-centric, that successfully flooded our towns and cities with black tar heroin just as the availability of prescription opioids was ebbing. Our porous border was the linchpin of that model in two ways. One, it allowed traffickers to be caught by police to be deported and to re-enter the country, ensuring an unbroken stream of illegal labor for trafficking organizations. Two, it allowed drug dealers to display their ill-gotten gains at home in Mexico, gaining status in their towns by poisoning our people. That's above and beyond the simple fact that an insecure border allows massive amounts of drugs to be smuggled into our country. Make no mistake, we are under chemical attack. Fentanyl is so potent that even a small amount, the equivalent of a few grains of salt, can be lethal. Earlier this year, police seized enough fentanyl to kill 26 million Americans. Securing the border is a matter of life and death. We have got to build the wall. This amendment that we're talking about here would provide the $5 billion that the President has asked for and ensures that he has the legal authority he needs to get it done. Let's back the President and the American people here in the House today and put the wall money in the funding bill. It's not going to happen under Nancy Pelosi. That much is certain. Now is the time. This is the bill, and this is the body, and we're at the right place. The American people can't afford any more delay. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Perry, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are here to talk about the promise that we made to the American people. And as the proud son of immigrants, my great-grandmother escaped a child bride situation in Colombia and came here with a shirt on her back and her little girl and just enough skills to make it through in America, and she did it legally. And we are a compassionate country who supports legal immigration. But we're here to talk about illegal immigration and the one chance we have left to solve that. Border security is a bipartisan issue, and it's not just about a wall or a fence. It's about stopping things like illegal immigration and human trafficking, because seeing little girls sold into sex slavery into this country is not a compassionate thing for the American taxpayer to be a part of. It's about declining economic conditions for America's working poor, knowing that the average high school dropout in America makes about $25,000 a year, and over the last 20 years, that has increased the amount of people through illegal immigration that don't have a high school diploma by about 25%. Who's standing up for the working poor that were born in this country? And then there's the abuse of the American taxpayer. Pennsylvanians, where I represent a portion of the population, paid an additional $1.3 billion in taxes this year for things like education, incarceration, health care, and a whole raft of social services. Senior citizens struggling to pay their property taxes in Pennsylvania risk losing their homes for paying for those kind of things, and it is completely avoidable. And then there's the rise of the opioid crisis, where fentanyl across the border, the southern border, has increased 750% since the beginning of the year. I talked to my DAs today. In the two major counties I represent, that's 1 death a day due to opioid and fentanyl overdose. And then there's the potential for terrorism through our southern border, where our Border Patrol says that they seized 10 terrorists a day. Mr. Speaker, regardless of all those reasons that I've just outlined, there is still just one more that is the most important, and that is that we made a promise to the American people to secure the border. This is our last chance. Nancy Pelosi will not do this, and the American people are counting on us to do what we said we would do, and that's why I'm advocating for the funding package for the border on the CR. We'll have to say no. Mr. Speaker, I yield.
Gentlemen, I recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan.
Mr. Speaker, everyone knows the old line. Everyone knows the old line. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. But we're going to have to change that line. We're going to need a new one. The new line should be, fool the American people 4 times, shame on Congress. Remember what we did March, right? The March big omnibus spending bill? We said, oh, no, we're not going to put the border wall funding on this bill because we're going to do it in September. Then we get to September. No, wait a minute. We're not going to put it on this bill because we're going to do it on December 7th. And then December 7th coming. Wait a minute. We're not going to keep our promise. We're not going to put the border funding wall money on that bill. We're going to do it December 21st. And what did we learn today? Now they're talking about kicking it to February 8th. You've got to be kidding me. Really? I mean, February 8th, when Nancy Pelosi is Speaker, do we really? I'm supposed to believe, we're supposed to believe that we're then going to build the border security wall and keep our promise from the 2016 campaign? No way. 4 different times we promised something and then kicked the can down the road. And I'll tell you this, you know when else we should have done it? September, March, September, December 7th, and now, you know when we really should have done it? Last week. Last week, when the President of the United States stood in the Oval Office and told Congresswoman Pelosi, Nancy, this is fine. This is fine. We don't need to go behind closed doors. Transparency is a good thing. Let's do what we said. Let's build the border security wall. That we should have passed it last week. Instead of taking a 6-day weekend, we should have passed it last week. So I'm sick of the games. The House Freedom Caucus is sick of the games. More importantly, most importantly, the American people are sick of the game. So let's just do what, just like Congressman Perry said, let's do what we said. We make this job way, way too difficult. It's pretty simple. What'd you tell the voters you were going to do? What they elect you to do? Go do that. Mr. Speaker, tomorrow the Freedom Caucus is going to do that. We got an amendment. We got an amendment that says $5 billion for the wall, reform our asylum laws, fix the problem. Common sense, basic amendment that everyone in this country knows needs to be done, and now is the time to do it. We didn't do it the 4 times before, but now's the time to do it. So let's get it done this week. Let's do what we said. I appreciate the chairman's leadership of our group, appreciate his special order tonight. We know what we got to do. Let's just do it.
Mr. Speaker, I couldn't agree more. It's time that we deliver on behalf of the American people and fulfill the promises that the President made many months ago. And someone who has been key in that, who knows this problem better than most because he represents a district in New Mexico, the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Pierce.
Thank the gentleman for yielding, and thank the Speaker. I do represent the 2nd District of New Mexico. That's the part of New Mexico that lies on the border with Mexico. Make no mistake about it, this issue is one that is important to the entire nation. We're talking about a single subject, and that is securing the border. That's all the discussion is about. The rest of the spending in the bill, maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong, but that's not part of the discussion. The discussion is, are we going to secure the border or not? The gentleman from Ohio had it exactly right, that the President sat there and said, we are going to take this in front of the American people. He said, I'll take responsibility for it, and we are going to have that discussion. But now then the Speaker of this House has said we're not going to have the discussion. We came here as members of Congress to make important decisions, sometimes very weighty decisions, sometimes very hard decisions. Frankly, this decision is not that hard. Secure the border. That's it. That's all we're asking for from this institution and from our friends in the Senate. But somehow, we're finding that that's too hard an ask. The American people don't think it's too hard an ask. And it's not that it's a racial question. The 2nd District of New Mexico is 52% Hispanic, 60% overall minority. Don't think it's too hard an ask. They agree. And it's not, no matter how they feel on immigration question, no matter how they feel on amnesty, they agree that the border must be secure. They agree that we must know who's coming here and why they're coming here. As we watch the people gathered at Tijuana, there are concerns about exactly who makes up this group. A secure border allows us to answer those questions. An open border does not allow us to open those questions. So I'm here tonight to stand with my friends in the Freedom Caucus to say to the Speaker, to say to the leaders, that we simply need to take this question up. We have the amendment. It's fairly straightforward, fairly simple. I support the amendment. I support the question, will we secure the border? The answer should be yes. Thank the gentleman again. Would yield back my time.
I thank the gentleman from New Mexico. I recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Heiss.
I thank my friend from North Carolina. Mr. Speaker, we all know that immigration continues to be one of the most pressing issues that we're facing in our country today. And the question of illegal immigration is not going away. In fact, it's growing. It's getting worse. It's getting more complex with each passing day, and Congress has repeatedly failed to take any action whatsoever. And we have the opportunity now in this spending bill to finally deliver results for the American people Again, something that we have not done over and over and over again. The Department of Homeland Security has reported that roughly, on an average, 2,000 illegal aliens are crossing our southern border every day. And now we learn from Border Patrol that in recent months there's been an increase of 90% attempted illegal individuals crossing our borders compared to this time last year. The border crisis is for real. It's time for us to act. The President has requested $5 billion. That's really not a whole lot of money compared to $1.3 trillion that we spend in discretionary spending every year. And look, the wall is not the whole answer, but it is the first step, because walls work. Wherever there have been walls put in place, there's been a great results that have been produced. For example, a 92% drop in illegal traffic in San Diego since the wall was there, 95% decrease in El Paso, 90% decrease in Tucson. Walls work. Now look, there's other things we need to do, some practical steps, from closing the asylum loopholes and stopping chain migration, making E-Verify mandatory. There's other things. But I hear right now the voice of millions of Americans from my district and across the country, as we have all heard the chant, build the wall, build the wall, build the wall. And we're standing here tonight as a voice for millions of Americans who feel like they've lost their voice in Washington. And we're saying it's time right now, build the wall. Let's do it. And I thank the gentleman. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Norman, for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of this special order. You know, I walked in this chamber tonight, and I thought this brings a new meaning to major in the minor. We've got something that is as important to the sovereignty of this country in securing our borders. And I thought, and here we are at the last hour saying we're going to get out of here before Friday on something this important. You know, I was in line getting some work done, and the president came on, and he was saying he challenged Speaker Pelosi, he challenged the senator. And he said, you know, bring the fight on. We're going to stay here, we're going to fund the wall. We're going to get the $5 billion. Now we hear talk that maybe we won't. We're going to pass a continuing resolution for 2 months. I'm sick of it. Nobody can fund your business on you know, month by month by month. And here we are advocating our constitutional obligations to make this country sovereign. As has been said by Mr. Meadows and Mr. Jordan, drugs, all the things that come into this country. I'm for immigration, but it's legal immigration. And we need to sit up here as long as it takes. If it's the next 6 months, sit up here until we get it. If we think we're going to get it when the gavel passes on January 3rd, it's not going to happen. I support what we're doing. Now is the time for us to have a backbone finally and support this country and make sovereign borders a law. Fund it. You know, $5 billion, how did the previous administration get $153 billion to give to a rogue country? We can't come up with $5 billion. It's sad to say the least. I support what we're doing. Hopefully we can get this thing done and sit up here. It's time to fight, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Mr. Speaker, may I inquire as to how much time we have remaining?
$13 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recognize the gentleman from Virginia, my good friend, Mr. Griffin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Meadows. I appreciate it, in recognizing that the time is drawing short and we have lots of other people who want to speak on this issue. I will attempt to keep myself in check on the time. Everybody knows we have to secure our border. And when we talk about building the wall, we're not just talking about bricks and mortar. We're talking about securing our borders with all devices available to us, whether that be drones, smart fences like they have in Israel, where they protect 17 miles of their border with a fence that if something hits it, they send people out to find out what's going on. We have to use all the tools in the toolbox, and the $5 billion is just the start on what we need to do to protect all of our borders, but it's an important start. You know, we've heard about the drug crisis, and all of our districts are affected by it. And a lot of times people say, in the mountains of Southwest Virginia, Morgan, why are you so concerned about this illegal immigration? Well, let me tell you why. The Mexican drug cartels are bringing methamphetamine into my district. They use it as a distribution area. They're the main supplier of that drug, and now that we've gotten opioids a little bit under control and we're starting to get that where it should be, the Mexican cartels are our biggest problem in the mountains of Southwest Virginia. It's important that we secure our borders, build the wall, protect the American people, protect our borders, protect our laws. I yield back.
And I recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, my good friend, Mr. Budd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your yielding. And we know our immigration system is broken and desperately in need of reform. No sovereign country in the world has scrutinized the way America is just for simply wanting to secure our borders. For decades, the United States has taken in millions of immigrants. And in fact, that number is about 1 million per year. And that's something we're going to continue to do. Immigrants historically have been a major asset to the growth and the prosperity of our country. However, the issue before America is not legal immigration, but illegal immigration. It's interesting to me that throughout the years, Democrats have supported securing our borders. In 2006, the Secure Fence Act was signed into law by President Bush, authorizing 700 miles of border fence and $50 billion in total maintenance. That's a far stretch from the small $5 billion in comparison that President Trump is asking for today. We should remember that the Secure Fence Act passed through Congress with bold and broad Democrat support. So in 2013, we should also remember that Senator Schumer himself sponsored a bill that invested $46 billion in border security improvements, that added 700 miles of border fencing. That's $41 billion more than what President Trump is currently asking for. So what changed, Mr. Speaker, between now and then? Simply politics. Politics is the only thing that's changed. But to me, securing our country's borders and making sure people feel safe should be above politics. Our ICE agents and Border Patrol need the necessary resources to do their jobs effectively and with confidence. It is hard to plug a leak when you're working with the wrong tools, and the solution is simply to shut the water off at the source. In closing, I propose these questions to my friends across the aisle. If now is not the time to secure our border, then when is? If not today, then when? And where do we go from here? If we can't come together to solve a problem that both Republicans and Democrats know exists, I worry that our tribal political environment will hold the security of American citizens hostage for years to come. I urge my Democrat colleagues to turn back the clock and remember a time when putting the country first was more important than putting the party first. I thank the chairman for his friendship, for his time, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I recognize the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer, for a minute and a half.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise to call upon this body to fulfill its duty to protect the American people. Our colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to claim that strengthening border security is about separating families or preventing them from immigrating to the U.S. In reality, it is about protecting the American people by stopping the flow of dangerous individuals across the southern border. The Department of Homeland Security Secretary Nelson has confirmed that ISIS has produced written materials that encourage ISIS followers to cross our southwest border, given the loopholes that they are also aware of, and that on average, her department now blocks 10 known or suspected terrorists a day from traveling to or attempting to enter the United States. The 4 individuals shown here, one of whom had been previously identified and flagged for insurgency terrorism, were stopped in Panama while trying to make their way to the U.S. Thanks to a fortunate tip and coordination between U.S. and Panamanian law enforcement, these individuals were stopped. This should be alarming to every American, especially concerning the dangerous individuals we may have missed and will continue to miss due to our lack of robust border security. I'm proud of the job our Border Patrol and law enforcement officers are doing to protect their country, and I urge my colleagues to do our duty to protect the American people from dangerous individuals by taking border security seriously and fully funding the President's proposal for border security. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Cloud.
Mr. Speaker, tonight I speak to the humanitarian and criminal crisis at our southern border. This crisis has been permitted to exist because of Congress's failure to act. For over 30 years, the American people have been promised results, but they've received empty promises. We know from history that our southern border wall works. This is not a new concept. Where we've implemented a wall, we've seen great success in curbing illicit activity. Our nation is a generous nation, one of the most diverse in the world, and our generosity is being taken advantage of by illegal cartels across our southern border. These cartels have created a humanitarian and criminal crisis that abuses the rule of law and costs innocent lives. Cartels recruit and send migrants across our border, making thousands of dollars a person in a strategy to tax our human resources and distract from our enforcement against drug trafficking. As representative of the 27th District of Texas, the southern part of my district is just 2 hours from the border. I know the good men and women who serve on our southern border, and they always prioritize life. Cartels know this and take advantage of it. Failure to complete a southern border wall and loopholes in our asylum laws have created a magnet for illegal immigration. And according to DHS, around 80% of asylum cases that go to a hearing are rejected by the judge as illegitimate. DHS spokesman Tyler Holton pointed out earlier this year that smugglers and traffickers understand our broken immigration laws better than most. The catch and release process, whereby migrants come into the country and are issued a date to appear in court, often years away, are released into the interior, and it's driving this humanitarian crisis. ISIS reports that the number of migrants, including many women and children, seeking entry has increased dramatically in recent years. They often find themselves at risk for assault and abuse such as rape, beatings, kidnappings, and robbery. Tonight, Mr. Speaker, we're here advocating for an end to the humanitarian and criminal crisis on our southern border caused by Congress's failure to act. This means ending the status quo, funding border security, and closing the loopholes in our broken asylum system. Thank you. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Speaker, may I inquire as to how much time I have left?
Gentleman has 3 minutes.
Okay. I'm going to yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from Texas.
Securing our border is a term that we've heard so often that has lost its punch inside the Beltway. But that doesn't mean the American people have forgotten about it. We made a promise to our folks to secure our borders, and we've got to keep that promise. Without question, funding to build the wall is necessary, and now is our chance to do it. Many sections of our border cannot be secured without a wall, and Congress must act to ensure that it's built. But bad policies like catch and release must be addressed by Congress as well. Take the recent quotes and actions from many of the migrants that have been in these caravans, abusing our catch and release policy to seek asylee status in order to work in our country. These migrants were demanding entrance and jobs, waving foreign flags while burning ours, cursing our government and our president, and vowing that our laws mean nothing to them. Are these people who share our allegiances? Should we not demand a lawful immigration system so that we can determine who we let in? It's not a secure border. Is not a secure border a prerequisite for that? We must increase penalties for illegally crossing our border. Earlier this year, I co-sponsored the Zero Tolerance for Illegal Entry Act, which would make doing so a felony. And this would encourage legitimate asylum seekers to do so at authorized points of entry. This should be a component of reform. Just this week, in a story we've seen over and over, agents arrested illegal border crossers with over 100 pounds of meth. Without our border agents, these dangerous drugs would be in our schools and our communities. We made a promise to our constituents to build this wall. We must prioritize the interests of the American people, and I'm willing to fight for this and hope that my colleagues are as well. And I want to thank you for your leadership, Mr. Chairman. I yield.
Mr. Speaker, as I close out this particular special order, I think it's appropriate for us to remind the American people that there is a bad case of Potomac fever up here in Washington, D.C. They forget what they promised the American people, and yet what they must do is not forget this time. Mr. President, we're going to back you up. If you veto this bill, we'll be there. But more importantly, the American people will be there. They'll be there to support you. Let's build the wall and make sure that we do our job in Congress. And I yield back.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2017, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Garrett, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.